So for chapter 4, histology, we're going to start with this video talking about epithelial tissue and nervous tissue. It is very, very important to stay organized when you talk about histology because there's lots of different categories and subcategories, and it's important to stay on top of it. So for this unit only, I'm going to be including the verbiage, the words themselves, in the PowerPoint slides. So when we look at the tissues of the body, it turns out there's only 4 tissues of which our body is made. We're going to start with epithelial tissue. We're going to continue with nervous tissue. And then we're going to talk about connective tissue and muscle tissue. You can take a look at this slide to see all the different places where these types of tissue are found. But there's only 4 different types. So let's start with our terminology. Tissues is defined as a group of cells similar in structure and function. Histology is the study of these tissues. There are 4 types of tissues, and the keywords associated with them are also shown here. Epithelial tissue, the keyword is covering. Connective tissue, the keyword is support. Be careful with this one. The keyword is support and not connection. For muscle tissue, the keyword is movement. And for nervous tissue, the keywords are control and communication. So we're going to start off with epithelial tissue, talk about a definition, some characteristics, types and examples, and then the glands. Keep in mind, everything we're doing here is epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue is, the keyword is covering, but in fact, there's many different things that epithelial tissue does. Absorption, protection, filtration, excretion and secretion, and sensory reception. The characteristics of epithelial tissue hold true for almost all epithelial tissues. There's a few variations in there, but for the most part, these things are basically true. First of all, epithelial tissue has a quality called cellularity and specialized contact. When you're looking at epithelial tissue, you'll notice that the cells are tightly tied together, and it is made entirely of cells. That is what we mean by cellularity. In other words, there's not anything in between the cells. There's not some kind of fibers or something in there. They're pretty much just touching each other. Think of pancakes in a frying pan, and you pour dough around, you try to make 4 different pancakes, and you can kind of see the 4 different pancakes, but if they start to run together, they perfectly tie together. That's actually how epithelial tissue works. And this also points to the quality of specialized contacts. The fact is that oftentimes they are attached to each other through different proteins, and it ensures that they are very tightly tied together. All right. The second quality of epithelial tissues are polarity. In other words, the polarity is a general term that means different from one side to the other. And in this case, epithelial tissue has an apical surface and a basal surface. And whether you were talking about simple epithelium, which has 1 layer, or stratified epithelium, which has many layers, in either case, there's still an apical surface and a basal surface. And the way you want to remember these words is apical, think of the apex of a mountain, so the top of the mountain, apical. That would be the surface, the top surface. And then the basal surface, think of a basement, that's the bottom surface. So the basal surface is down here, and you can see you have one for stratified epithelium as well. And underneath of this, you'll notice there's pink stuff down there. That's connective tissue. We'll talk about that next. For now, just keep in mind, simple epithelium is 1 layer of cells. Stratified epithelium is multiple layers of cells. That'll come up later. All right. So the next quality of characteristics is that it is supported by connective tissue. For example, the basal lamina and reticular lamina can form a structure called the basement membrane, which is fairly well known. So you'll have, every time you have an epithelial tissue, you will always have some sort of connective tissue present that helps to support it. Do you remember the key word for connective tissue? Support. So we have this connective tissue that always exists under epithelial tissue. So a good example of this is in the skin. The epidermis of your skin is made of epithelial tissue, and the dermis of your skin is made entirely of connective tissue. So what you'll notice is that there is this invagination here, and the connective tissue completely supports the epithelial tissue. Well, that actually brings us to our next quality. The reason why epithelial tissue needs to be supported is that it is avascular. The term avascular means without blood vessels. So you'll see two roots in here. You see the word vascular there? That means it has a blood supply. And when you have an A in front of a word, that means without. So avascular means no blood supply. However, these epithelial tissues are actually innervated, which means that they have a nerve supply. You see that little word in there, that root nerve? So they have some kind of nervous supply, usually some level of sensation. So that's kind of ironic. I put these two qualities together because most people would think if something has a blood supply, it has a nervous supply. If it has a nervous supply, it probably has a blood supply. In this case, it has the nervous supply, but no blood supply. And lastly, and perhaps this is the most unique and amazing concept of epithelial tissue is regenerative. Epithelial tissues undergo mitosis. In other words, they replicate, they duplicate, they make more of themselves. That's very important when you're talking about tissue that is covering your body. So now we're going to look at different types and examples of epithelial tissues. First of all, we come across these terms here: squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. These nice pictures are so beautiful. They never really look exactly like this, but you'll start to see some similarity there, especially in the nuclei. So what we'll see is all of these things are cells. You see the nucleus inside of there. There are also organelles inside of there. These are living cells. You have a nucleus in the center, and you can see the position of the nucleus can sometimes help you identify different tissues. So at the top here we have squamous. When you think of squamous epithelium, think of squashed. When you think of cuboidal epithelium, think of a cube. And when you think of columnar epithelium, think of a column or a tall rectangular structure. And you can see again that these nuclei have a particular look to them depending on the tissue. I would say especially cuboidal epithelium, you can definitely see that circular nucleus usually smack dab in the middle of the cell. So that's a good clue that it's cuboidal. For columnar epithelium, one of the things to pay attention to is not actually that the nucleus is elongated, because it's not oftentimes an oval. It looks kind of circular actually. But what you'll find is that the nucleus can change position depending on the type of tissue. So I'll show you some examples of that. So these are the three basic shapes. And then just so you know, you remember simple and stratified? Simple meaning one layer of cells, stratified meaning many layers of cells. To simplify things a little bit, I'll just let you know that the only type of stratified tissue in the human body is squamous. We have stratified squamous epithelium. We also have simple squamous epithelium. We have simple cuboidal epithelium. We have simple columnar epithelium. In other words, one layer of cells in each case. And then we have a few variations of those, but that's basically what we have.